Hello, everybody, and welcome to IaCConf 2025, the first of hopefully many IaCConf events. My name is Gareth Kersey. I'm on the organizing team here at IaCConf, as well as the presenting team at Spacelift. All very excited to have you here today. What started as an idea late last year after talking to people at events, talking to experts in the community about a bit of a gap that we saw in a conference dedicated to infrastructure as code. Here's where we are. So everything you'll see today, IaC is the focus, whether we're talking about AI, different methodologies and processes, how to get started. It's all centered around infrastructure as code. And honestly, the response has been amazing. Just from the chatter that's been happening in the chat, over 2,500 registrations. Just in the past hour when I've looked, it's over 2,700, 66 countries represented. And you can see from that sign up when we asked, what's your level of experience with IaC? We saw a pretty good distribution there as well, which is great to see. We've got content today that'll serve each of you looking for how to get started, using it in your day-to-day, and then how do you think about leading initiatives with IaC? We also want to hear, moving forward, we'll have some information later. We don't want this to be a single event every year. We want to continue this throughout the year, whether it's meetups at other conferences, cities, whatever that might be. We want to build content for each of you based on your experience. So always looking for feedback, but great to see us at the start. Real quick on the speakers. We've got a tremendous lineup, and this is really what made today possible. Patrick's going to get us started with a keynote on AI and platform. Luca has a session on platform as a product. Robert Hafner, the author of Terraforming Depth, is going to be here today. He has a Q&A session about his book. Emin, and if you look further down, Flavius, right after the keynote, for those who are new to IaC, you got to jump into this session. They're going to run a session on how to get started with IaC. Matt Gowie, this MasterPoint CEO, is going to run a session on how to clean up the mess of your platforms. Rachel Sweeney doing a session on Crossplane, which I know is a popular topic. Alan's doing a session on infrastructure from code. What happened to that? Where's it going? Sharon is doing a panel on AI and ML and infrastructure as code. Dimitri Vlachos is going to do a session on some research that Spacelift did on infrastructure automation and what we see in the market. Ned from Ned in the Cloud is going to do a session on Ansible and Terraform, always a hot topic. Joe Hutchinson is going to do a session on platform engineering and how to think about infrastructure as code as the core of that platform. And then Marcin, the co-founder of Spacelift, is going to wrap it up with a quick note to the community. So big thank you to the speakers here, because without these speakers, without their contributions, none of this would be possible. So quick note on navigating the platform. The platform we're using here is called Goldcast. It's pretty intuitive, but real quick at the top here, you'll see stage. That's bringing you back to the centerpiece. The agenda, you can go look what's happening throughout the day, and you can jump between the main track and breakout sessions. So, and sometimes there are two different sessions running. You can jump between the two. And then speakers, where you can go that previous slide of all those speakers, connect them on LinkedIn and make some connections. On the right-hand side, chat. I think you've all found the chat, which is great. There's also a Q&A session there. Not every session will have a Q&A. Where there is the speaker available to do Q&A, we'll have that. And so after Patrick's keynote, for example, we'll have a Q&A available. For IaCConf attendees, thank you to Robert Hafner and his publisher. We can offer Terraforming Depth, which is what he's going to do a session on today, a 45% discount code for IaCConf attendees. So you can either scan the QR code here. We'll also have a link that will go in a follow-up email tomorrow that you can use to go to the website. If you use IaCConf25 at checkout, you get 45% off. This book is great whether you're just getting started with IaC, or maybe you've been doing it for years and you want to revisit concepts or learn about some new concepts. So thank you to Robert Hafner and his publisher for this gift that we can give to you all. And so with that, we are ready to start the day. First up is Patrick, who is going to give us the keynote on AI and platform teams. With that, I hope you all enjoy the conference, and thank you very much for being here.
Hi. Today we're going to talk about the relationship of generative AI and platform teams. And as part of the IaC conference, I think you are likely to be part of one of the platform teams. And AI is coming to you and to your organization. Now, with any new technology, how do you bring new technology inside of an organization? It starts with one team, a couple of teams, you learn from the best practices, and ultimately you want to scale this out, right? So like all the practices eventually come centralized that are reusable in other teams, a platform team. And in this case, with the whole Gen AI craziness, like DevOps, we had two silos brought together. In this case, it is the data science silo that bridges with the engineering. And there's new things that are happening. And for good and for worse, we call this now the AI engineer. It's just a label to get the stories out, and you can find information that is emerging in this new technology era. Now, the friction is clear, right? Data science was typically somewhere on their own kind of part in the organization. They were not very well connected to engineering. Now, what you could do is you can bring a little bit of engineering into your data science team. And eventually you just bring data science as part of your engineering. And then you bring the parts that are shared across all the teams, and you still have that data science. Kind of that like spectrum is where the AI engineer shines. Now we've seen this, a platform team, for those who don't know, there's different ways of collaboration. And it's where you have that central kind of team. You enable also things on top of that, on top of the platform, and you help streamline teams. You can do this by providing APIs, by doing facilitation, or just some collaboration, part of the team topologies. So today we're going to talk about how this works with AI and generative AI. So we're going to show you what goes into the platform, what you can do with enablement, and what you can do for governance. So here am I. I'm Patrick Debois, and most people know me as an independent advisor in the industry, dev, sec, ops, and currently I am focused on engineering with AI. I do some workshops, some fractional CTO, and I'm also a curator of the iNativeDev.io, but a little bit more on that later. First part is the platform. You've probably been very related to anything on infrastructure. So what services go into a Gen AI platform? Well, obviously, first thing you need to care about is models. Some will be open source, maybe you run it on your own. Some are SaaS providers, much like your cloud providers, and you have to give access, and that's part of your new infrastructure. How do you provide the model to your teams? And then likely, if they have anything on content and documents, you want to index that in a vector database, like a semantic search. And in the past, there were maybe some dedicated vector databases, but right now, every respectable database has a way to vectorize your data in there as well. Now, that brings up is that it's not just about like bringing content and indexing your content. You will also see that it will require integrations with all of the content providers that you have, your databases, your content management systems. Everything needs to do that. So that becomes like a new service. RAG is a service that you offer to all your teams. And if you go a little bit step further, then you might provide agents, and you kind of have a model, you do it some actions, you need to worry about privileges, another thing new in your stack of infrastructure that you need to manage. And then now with the whole, model context protocol, it is about providing tools and services, much like we had an API catalog. Now you have to think about like exposing all your tools as MCP services and build a catalog around that. And executing those things require sometimes a sandbox, because generating code or doing certain stuff, you want to have this isolated. And you might think of this as maybe a serverless or a container, and it's quite similar, but this thing is maybe for longer term execution. So you have to kind of think, how do you do this? And then even with running desktop applications for kind of helping people navigate applications, that's also a new kind of sandbox that you provide. This is maybe your before GenAI, you're fine-tuning models, and maybe you're more advanced. You also do that right now, and you build a registry and version control. So everything is not new, but it applies to the new technology as well. And obviously, like one of the big pain points is that when applications are up and running, people change things and they want to have testing and make sure it keeps on working. Now, in the new world and the AI engineering world, we call this evaluations. And it's instrumental that you provide that service for people to be able to run kind of evaluations or tests. This is different from your CI/CD pipeline that you already have. This is running prompts, models, and agents and looking at the input and output and see if they keep working. Another thing that you want to have gated is we have all the models, but we allow only certain kind of providers, and we want to have the same interface. So think of this as a proxy that you control the access to different models, different cost providers in there as well. Another new piece of infrastructure that you'll likely need to manage. And then there's caching. Okay, cost is definitely that monitoring. Makes sense to do that as well. And then when things fail in production, you also need, similar to the testing, a traceability. Like that call in the application actually needs a trace, and we need to see what model was used, what was the prompt, what was the input. And so that brings up a new kind of like observability layer as well. And then we monitor this all the time in production. Similar to what we do with end-to-end testing, we can now do also with the data and the quality, whether like customers like it, whether the output was toxic, whether like whatever information we have on inputs and outputs of that. And we also want to get the feedback from the end user. And it's one of the things you learn is that like, hey, it's working, it's not working. It's hard to define with an API because it's not binary, and you want the feedback from the customers. Thumbs up, thumbs down is one way of getting feedback. If you copy maybe some text, then you know they liked it. If they try again, then you know they didn't like it. If you put an auto editor in there, you can capture the feedback of the changes they do with certain kind of generation that you've done. So that gives you a test harness that you can then bring into your evals and feedback to do more and further testing. But eventually, this is non-deterministic and will have to even more rely on observability, because certain things we just have to test in production together with our customers and see how it works. So this new mindset of this new tool set with observability, but non-deterministic, is quite crucial that you support that with whatever infrastructure and services that you provide in your platform team. Now, you might think we're still at the level of LLMs. If you look at this slide, this is the evolution over a couple of, a year and a half, where we went from the LLM to LLMs with RAG, graph, RAG, functions, reasoning, memory, and it just kind of explodes, right? So it's not that simple. The stack of an application is not just a call to an LLM anymore. So we need kind of that observability as well. And then to run these kind of applications, that tool set is also exploding, much like, remember the CNCF landscape. This is its own landscape on its own that you need to keep track of. So this was a brief overview of all the infrastructure. So you as an infrastructure as code person will likely have to define and bring and spin up these new environments and keep them maintained. But the next thing is, how do you actually have your users use this and enable your customers to get better at GenAI and using GenAI in your product? So the first thing is, usually you bring up some sandboxing or environments for prototyping. They can explore functionalities, whether that's your product owner or your developer. You give them access because it's important to do that prototyping for them to learn what is possible and what is not possible. You learn that there's also some SDKs, like abstraction layers that they can use, and you provide them and maybe set a standard for this for them to use. Pick one of them depending on your language. And that gets you a long way instead of just using the low layer level API. You can set up a local development environment, help them with that, although it's usually not that good compared to the actual services. But if you can get around this, that's a good way to run things locally. And you focus on the reusable components, whether that is your prompt, whether that is your model, whether that is your agent, whether that is your testing. Obviously, much like we provided reusable libraries, you can do this here as well. And a golden path, don't use any kind of combination of infrastructure, but limit them to a set of components that you can support. The problem with GenAI project is typically that either they don't have a good business case, so they were still on the marketing budget, or they were very AI and data centric, and were still worried about training and fine tuning. And they worry about the cost. And they're all valuable things, but it is important to get started and to do something because that's the only way you can learn. And as a developer, it is a new stack. Like, why is model A better than model B? Nobody can really explain, but it's a lot of trial and error. You need test environments, as I explained, to kind of make sure everything keeps working. The frameworks are so brittle and so new, although they are getting better. Documentation is hard to find. So all of the things, if you kind of improve that service as a kind of enablement, is really helpful. But probably the most painful thing is for them to write tests and to make sure that updates do not break things. So that is the importance of the evaluations. And what kind of evaluations can you do to test? Well, imagine you ask something to an LLM, it gives you an output. Now I can check this for patterns or exact words. Okay. I can check using another model to see whether the content was toxic or it was happy, not very useful. Semantic distance is like how far the question and the answer are related to each other. Or I can just ask an LLM, sometimes called LLM as a judge, or I can ask that human feedback. Remember where we capture all the feedback. So different ways of evals to get feedback in there. Now, besides enabling all the things, you also have to work about this fear and help engineers not to fear for that job. You have to kind of help them with AI and have a learning kind of culture to have them experiment with things. And if they look at their own world, this is the development itself, not just AI in a product, but in engineering, they also start noticing differences. Like they use a copilot, they generate more code, but then the review times go up because the code is bigger. So whatever we save is shifting complexity to other parts of the process. And there's some irony in this if kind of that changing from producing code to managing code is different, producing agents to managing agents. And we've learned over the time that automation kind of has sometimes an opposite effect in the way that, like, if there's too many questions it asks, we just say yes. We don't know how it works anymore because it's generated by AI. So there's lots of counter patterns that actually are caused when you move into this new kind of way of working in their job. And if I looked at back at DevOps, we are still very early on in the journey. Yes, we had infrastructure as code that had testing, then we went to monitoring, then we changed the architecture to avoid failure, then we dealt with the unknowns, and then because we weren't good anymore at dealing with failures, we had chaos engineering. And the same thing I expect will kind of happen with these new kind of GenAI things. We're still much like making it work, and we're getting a little bit into testing, but we'll get better at the other parts as well. And the irony is, if you look at back as the history of configuration management, early on, CF Engine was an agent, and it took on autonomous kind of decisions based on a set of rules. And people kind of felt uneasy on why it did certain things. And they needed a better control run that they can understand. And then Chef and Puppet came around by having these runs. And then even simpler, people want to almost like sit and watch the runs, and that kind of would be like Ansible, and make it more simplistic. So trust and complexity, they go hand in hand, and it's something to be considering. How do we deal with trust in this new world if we are still not good at testing yet? I mentioned about the change in developer, changing from producing code to managing code. It's almost like they become the operator of the code, or the manager. There's also kind of other shifts going on. Like we care less about the code. We start specifying the intent, and the intent, like a specification, gets translated to code. It's almost like we become QA and architects. And then we can discover new things. That's almost like the product owner, by prototyping, by vibe coding, by testing things. And then eventually we try to capture everything as knowledge. So we see a shift in the role of the developer in the middle to kind of its adjacent kind of areas as well. And then like that whole tool space, not just the infrastructure for the AI products, but also for the developer itself is changing. You can see it here in the landscape of AI native dev.io, where you see like a growing list of tools for developers in their kind of different tasks. Now, last part is the governance, and we want to create a safe environment. So we did the infrastructure, we enabled our customers, but within guardrails. And it's one of the things like you build it, you run it, that's good, but you need central governance, in my opinion, to make sure that nobody gets hurt. And there's a central guidance that happens as well. First step is typically make people aware that they don't copy and paste things. They are like all the same things that we did for security. Make sure you don't just download random things from the internet, basic security awareness, but it kind of is useful to repeat this actually also for the AI world and the AI era. Similar to not opting in at certain services, making sure certain content can't be crawled by agents, all part of that training to opt out on stuff. And then they want to make sure that, like similar to all the licensing of dependencies, is all the models are now also a dependency. So you have to check the licensing there as well and make sure that you know why and when to use a certain model, and also on the quality of the results. And similar to SBOM cards, you have model origin cards where you can read how the model was trained, how it was kind of available, which data set, and what are the pitfalls of those models. So that's something you could read as well as part of your governance. So you're not like exposing all models just out of the box, but you kind of pick a few that you support. You want to make sure you comply to legislation in the European Union. That's different than in the US, but a lot of things you need to take care of as an organization there as well that you need to comply to. And on the security level, one of the issues is still prompt injection, is people changing the behavior of your application by doing tricks similar to SQL injection. But as opposed to SQL injection, there is no solution yet for prompt injection. So you need to be aware and vigilant on kind of what is possible with your application. So threat modeling is still a thing that you need to do there. There are a little bit of solutions similar to a web application firewall. You can do guardrails to see whether certain content is kind of hate speech or contains certain topics. That's already helpful to block certain things. And you also want to watch the PII, the cost, and other things as part of your governance in there. And the more AI will take over, if it starts reading our desktops, whatever messages that we're sending, we're going to have a new set of privacy problems. And, the way that people deal with it is like, if you have a problem with AI, you just use more AI. So it's a tricky kind of balance, similar to that judging of output. But we need to make sure that people are aware of whatever they're sending over to the LLMs as well. So this is, in a nutshell, the new kind of infrastructure that you can do, the enablement you can do on top of that, and the governance you need to do on this. So if you're building and supporting teams I hope that gives you insight to do a better kind of overview of the things of the services that you can provide. And as a bonus, sometimes we talk about the platform team only inside of the technology, but you can do a platform team also inside of a product teams. So if you want to align different things and kind of make sure there's governance, enablement in the product, you can also think about a platform crew or an experience crew that actually helps people do a unified thing in the platform. So next to your cloud ops, your SecOps, your developer experience, your data platform, now you might have an AI platform team as part of this, whether that's the same team, whether it's a separate team. I hope I showed you that it is a different set of infrastructure. It's a different set of testing. It's a different set of observability. So make sure you don't just stay in the cloud abstraction, because there's a lot more that needs to be enabled on this. And I'm just curious, we're getting ready for Q&A. Tell me, are you setting up a platform team for GenAI? This is a poll I did a while ago, but I'm curious to hear what kind of infrastructure you're doing, what kind of problems you're having, and I'm happy to answer any questions on that. And with this, I thank you, and I'm curious, and please enjoy the rest of the conference, and I look forward to your questions. And let me know and connect to me on LinkedIn if you want the slides or have any feedback on this session. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much, Patrick, and thanks everybody for engaging in the chat. I've welcomed Patrick on stage here. Real quick, just a couple of housekeeping questions before we get into some for Patrick. Yes, all the sessions are being recorded today. So every session will be recorded. We'll have a follow-up email that's sent out tomorrow that you can all access. Patrick's slides, yes, we will share these ones. We'll go to each speaker and just make sure that the speaker is comfortable sharing, but Patrick is going to be able to share these slides. Lastly, on the book, people have been dropping in the notes. If you missed the QR code on the follow-up email, again, it'll be sent tomorrow. We'll have the link that you can use with the promo code IaCConf25 to get the 45% discount for Terraform in Depth. All right, so let's go through some of these. So let's start with this one here. So Patrick, this person is a platform engineer. They don't have the experience using AI past ChatGPT and GitHub Copilot. What's the best way to begin learning more? Would you recommend a course or a starter project?
Yeah, it can be daunting for people to start in the space. Roughly, you have to think about this. The content you'll find online is divided in two groups. One will kind of take you on a more data science journey, and it's all about like, how do models work? How does training work? And so on. I personally skip that part. I think it is interesting, but it's not the first thing you should be looking at as kind of that glue or that integration engineer. I would advise, like any new technology, find like a thinker project, like something that you care about, whether that's indexing the knowledge base of your company, maybe of your team, or something. That's one of the common things, or have it generate some pull requests. So you use one of the frameworks like LangChain or Llama Index to kind of build that simple thing. And that's the best way, because you care about the application and you actually kind of want to put the time in. Now, as for resources, this site deeplearning.ai has some good courses, or not about the data science, but are really explaining it into more engineering terms. So I'd recommend kind of working on that part. There's a lot of exploration, like any new technology, that you just have to put in the time as such. And as the content is so much moving, there's not like the one spot that I can point everybody to, unfortunately. So yeah, good luck.
All right, great, thank you. So next one here. So what are the biggest challenges for engineers adopting more AI in products?
So there was another question kind of in the chat I saw was when people relate DevOps, infrastructure as code, platform, and AI, there's two sides of this. There's the side who says we're building AI products and our platform team is supporting teams that build AI products. And then the other part is about we as software developers are using in our IDEs more AI to test this and whatever we are producing. Now, in the part about building products with AI, there's the phase that everybody's happy that it's finally working, which is great, the MVP, and put it in production. But even more than traditional code, whenever you change the prompt, you change the model, you change just one comma somewhere, the behavior is completely different. So the challenge I hear the most from companies is the testing and the observability, but especially in the testing, because how do you actually write those tests if they're non-deterministic? And I explained it in the talk, like, yes, we understand the regex and looking for a word, but if it's never the same thing. And so what it actually gets is deployments of these products, they need to be checked. We went from a world where CI/CD said when all the tests passed, it's okay, just go to production. With the bigger your AI product becomes, the more you have kind of evaluations for this and tests, but you're likely only going to hit like 85% of your tests succeeding, which is a very weird thing for a developer or testing. And that decision, whether you're going to go live with only 85% of the tests working, actually moves from the engineering side to the product owner side. So that kind of like is a shift that's really weird for people supporting applications as such. So that I would say that's definitely the bottleneck. If they already have tests, because usually they learn the hard way that they need to have more tests around this.
Sure. Yeah. This one is kind of in the same line. So what would you advise to invest in learning AI as a cloud professional?
The chances are, if you're a cloud professional, that you already have a specifically ecosystem like a Google, AWS, or Azure that you're doing. They have their own set of infrastructure. Maybe that's not like as polished as some of the other solutions, but what I see is that all of those vendors are kind of like catching up. So if you're already in that ecosystem, likely they will provide you with parts of the learning on the infrastructure and on the things that you know. But for example, AWS does not have a good testing framework, so you'll have to fill in the gaps. But I think the more we get along, the more you just get the training material from your traditional cloud vendors in there. So,
got it. Great. Yeah, there's a lot of good questions coming through in the chat. So if we don't get through all of these, we'll certainly do some follow-up afterwards. But here's a great one on security aspects. So which security aspects which should be considered when integrating LM tools into platform engineering?
So I assume this is more like for doing software engineering with AI, right? So the thing is, we know it's not secure in a way, right? So we know there's always going to be insecure code. So we do have those safeguards as much as we build them in, like code scanning, vulnerability scanning, and manual review and threat modeling. The biggest challenge there is the amount of code that we're producing. It's not that it's going to be the code that is being generated is going to be better and better, but the volume is hard to keep up with. So it's actually urging us to kind of automate more of the scanning and the aspects. Now, what you also see in the tools is that there start to be a bottleneck of humans reviewing things, and especially in security when you want to have that safety net. And I already mentioned it's that that risk game. Are we going to go live? Are we not going to go live? So that prompt injection, that code that is not secure, unfortunately, it's not a perfectly solved problem. One of the tools I kind of look at, which is doing great work in that space, is a company called Dry Run Security. And they actually use parts of the LLMs and the reasoning to kind of review the code that is being generated. So it's a mixture of SAS, DOS, and SCA, and then mixing that actually with an LLM that reasons about the results. I already mentioned it. What's the answer to solve things in AI? Use more AI. And that's what people are doing. So there's not like a silver bullet to make everything secure that is being generated with AI. So,
Great. All right, let's see here. So how about, is there a natural progression from using RAG with a commodity LLM to eventually training a custom model for IaC specifically within an organization?
So RAG is the model where you index all your information, and when you ask it a question, it enhances what the LLM knows by putting relevant pieces of documentation into your prompt. So that has been instrumental in not having to train models and not kind of having to, it also helps with access control. Because if you train a model, everybody has access to whatever is in the model. If you use RAG, it is access control based, so you can determine who has access to certain kind of content. Now, there is a thing if you want to get better results after a while, if RAG is not cutting it, you might consider training your model a little bit or fine-tuning your model on having a little bit of the domain-specific speak. So it starts answering a little bit better than the generic context that GPT models have, for example. Now, you could use RAG to generate question and answer pairs, which are then used to kind of actually train your model. So that's kind of what is happening. And you also see that IaC generator or code generation tools are using that same technique in a way that they kind of train examples of IaC and they fine-tune the model to get a better understanding of a specific domain, in this case being IaC. Now, it seems the industry is settling that this is more like if you've gotten to 90% with RAG, only then start getting into fine-tuning. Anyway, the 90% is arbitrary, but it's like we're in the beginning of the whole craziness. Everybody from the data science said, oh, you have to fine tune, because that was the commodity that everybody was used to train models to do something especially for you. So I think that flipped a little bit with the large language models, though.
Great. There's a couple questions in here about, career progression. Someone asked about moving from a back-end platform engineer and pivoting to an AI ML platform engineer. And again, similar, what are your thoughts on the ML ops, LLM ops, AI ops career track?
Yeah, so by the way, ML ops and AI ops and LLM ops, they're definitely different tracks, right? ML ops, training models, but it's more the traditional machine learning. So you could go that route. LLM ops is, there's only a few of them who actually do LLM ops in a way that you're like training LLMs. That's only for the happy few companies. And AI ops is another field which is more into prediction of kind of things that go wrong in production and training it on kind of more observability. So that's kind of like, it's different threads, and they kind of roughly have things like fine-tuning and training, but they work a little bit different. Now, you can go into this. I always found that it's hard. It's not hard to set up the infrastructure of these pieces. You can learn that, like, okay, if I need to run this command, and I see a lot of people doing kind of doing this with infrastructure as code. And it's actually quite easy to get into that track because your data people who are usually dealing with this, they want your help. They don't like to maintain servers. They don't like access control. So if you just ask them nicely and go into that like part of the company, you probably get a good response and start helping them. And that's a great way to kind of just start on that track.
Okay, great.
Yeah,
All right.
great
Thank you
questions,
very
by the
much,
way. Thank you.
Patrick.